Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I do hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am an author, and I'm coming to you here on another Storytime Thursday to go over and read chapter 12 of my first book, The Shadow of the Past, titled The Call of the Sea. I'd love to hear your feedback on thoughts, both on my dramatic reading or attempted dramatic reading, as well as what you think of the story and the chapter so far. So leave a comment, like, share, subscribe down below. That would be awesome. As well as there are links below for my socials, as well as both this book and the second book and the Sunburn Red that I wrote. So without further ado, here is The Shadow of the Past, Chapter 12, The Call of the Sea. The Dancer of Dawn cut through the water like a knife, its clean white sails stretched taut and straining against their masts, like children desirous to free themselves from their parents' grasp and run free on a grassy meadow. The ship had set out from port less than an hour previously, but already the vast harbors of Gyrodar were lost to sight. In the distance was their destination, the Isles of Mist. At least that was what the locals called them, but they were known as the Maer-el in the tongue of the elves that had made that island their home long ago. A wall of mist now dominated the view forward, as if a giant cloud had come to rest permanently on the ocean. To any who were not well used to these waters, it looked as though the was only a short distance away. But those seasoned sailors among the crew knew that it would still be several hours before the mist engulfed them. They could not have been they could not have said for sure whether it was simply the size of the wall that made it appear so close, or some woven spell or illusion, put in place to keep unwanted visitors away. But even the most aged veteran of the Romaldan fleets was still an awe-inspiring sight to behold. Lady Myra, who had been given command of the Dancer for this voyage despite having little experience with boats, found the passengers on the bow of the ship. The Goblin Urgar was quite obviously not enjoying his first sea voyage. If possible, he looked even greener than usual. Myra felt sorry for him. He had put a brave face on in the days of preparation, but she doubted very much that any goblin for generations had been on the sea. And the constant motion of the boat did not liken well to a goblin's sense of balance, as accustomed as they were to the firmness of towering mountains beneath their feet. Although she might have offered a few kind words, she felt it best not to embarrass him by such an action. So instead, she turned to Valinar. The elf was leaning heavily against the prow of the ship and staring into the sea, clearly lost in thought. While Myra had heard him say that he too had never been seen the sea, he seemed to be having no trouble with the rocking of the boat. In fact, the elf seemed to have better sea legs than all but the most veteran among the ship's crew. Val'inar did not seem to take any notice when Myra came up next to him and leaned against the railing. After a few moments of staring out into the mists that lay before them, she noticed that while seemingly lost in thought, Valinar's eyes continually darted around the water. Following his gaze, she saw several extremely large fish swimming around the bow of the ship, or at least they looked like fish. It took a moment to realize that while the creatures she was looking at did indeed have long, sleek, powerful tails, where the heads of the fish should have been, there were instead the torsos, arms, and heads of a humanoid creature. Closer inspection still showed that they were not perfectly human bodies. The torsos and arms seemed rather longer and thinner than a human's, and there were fins growing along their spines and from their elbows. The skin was also scaly, although noticeably less so than the tails. The faces were more fish-like as well, with the dull, lifeless eyes of a fish and mouths that twisted into perpetual grins filled with sharp teeth. So, murmured Myra, who almost disbelieved her eyes, they do exist. Such creatures have long been talked about of by our sailors, but I did not think they actually lived. At last Valinar turned to face Myra with a look of grim sadness on his face. After what seemed like a long pause, he said, "Indeed, they do exist. They are a long forgotten part of the history of Romalda." "How?" asked Myra. What do you know of the early history of Romalda? Inquired the elf. Lady Myra took a deep breath. Well, we have always been taught that this whole area, which we now call Romalda, was once, thousands of years ago, part of the Republic of the Sea, ruled over by a group of human nobles, of which I am a descendant, and elven. It is said that it was founded by the alliance between a tribe of elves of water and a group of humans. We brought the elves numbers and strength, and the elves taught us the weaving of spells and much of our architecture and culture. The elf nodded at this. And what happened to this Republic of the Sea? It fell, replied Myra simply. Even our scholars give no answer as to when and how, though there is much talk of a great war. Since then, the descendants of the nobles, or those claiming descent, have vied with each other for control of this region. And the elves? I know little of that, admitted Myra. I know there is no mention of them in our chronicles for at least the last 1,000 years. Magister once told me she believed that some offshoot of that people may still exist elsewhere, along the coasts of Serana, but she offered no proof. Some sailors say the elves live behind the Pale of Mists. It is all just rumor, however. The elf was silent for a few moments as he stared intently into the mists which lay ahead. The rumor may not be wholly untrue, he said at last. The ancient capital of the Water Elves lies within the mists, and most of what remains of the tribe of Water Elves does as well. Most of what remain? Yes, nodded Valinar. Unless I miss my guess, the elves intermarried, at least occasionally, with the human nobles, which is why the noble families of Romalda produce so many mages, even though, among humans in general, the ability to sense the area is both rare and random. I would also hazard that is why you and many other nobles possess sea green eyes. Myra chuckled and nodded in assent. That fact is one that is closely guarded by the noble families and the Guild of Magisters, since that is one of the ways in which the nobles have maintained their preeminence. But what of the elves themselves? You said what remained of them? Are there no longer any elves of that ancient tribe? I do not know whether or not any descendants of the tribe survive elsewhere, began Valinar, as you noted yourself. However, if you wish to know what happened to those of the tribe that stayed in their capital, you need only look over the side of the ship and behold what they have become. Lady Myra looked over the side of the dancer and gazed for a long moment at the Maer-men, as the legends of her people called them. How could those things be elves? Inquired Myra at last. Valinar sighed grimly before responding. It is the price elves pay for immortality and for our connection to the area. The fact that we do not age as a human or goblin would means that we tend to build strong attachments to some part of our environment. This is why most elves are affiliated with a specific element. In addition, the great degree to which area flows through us means that when we form such a strong connection, that area begins to take dominance within us and slowly shape our physical characteristics to match our environments. The longer we live, the more attached we become, the stronger the connection grows, until eventually we become part of that environment. We call the process fatenin, or fading. Normally, this only happens to the elders among the elves, and it happens slowly. It is why, although we elves do not die natural deaths, it is rare to find an elf older than a couple of thousand years, as few elves last that long before surrendering their minds and bodies completely to the element which they are bound to. It is spoken of only in whispers, even among elves, but there are times, often when some calamity strikes or if something threatens our homes, that whole groups of elves can very quickly fade, and sometimes that will even happen for a whole tribe. And that happened to the water elves? Yes, or at least I believe so. There is really no way to know for sure, as these creatures are little more than dumb beasts, but it seems likely that some calamity drove the entire tribe of water elves to forsake the world and become as you see them now. They probably even breed as fish breed now, and so even their children are born with minds little more than that of fish. Is there nothing that can be done for them? No, replied Valinar sadly. They may yet possess the abilities and skills of the elves they once were, but there is no way of communicating with them. They know nothing now but the sea. Are they dangerous? They have made Mariel their home and would no doubt defend it if they felt it was threatened. which would be very dangerous as they still possess the same connection with the area and would use it instinctively to defend themselves. But this group, which appears to be scouts of sorts, seems to have recognized in me a distant relative. While they are incapable of communication as you or I are familiar with the term, I believe that I have successfully conveyed to them my intention and do not think they will threaten us, although it might be wise if only I go ashore. If we even make it to the island without wrecking on the rocks, said Myra with an obvious note of worry, that mist is said to be extremely thick and the island itself rocky and treacherous. Sailors stay well clear of it unless they have no other choice. Many ships that venture straight into the mists are never heard from again. Do not worry on that score, smiled Valinar. The mist will part for us. How can you be so sure? Myra scoffed. Does that mean that there is some kind of spell to cast it aside? No, I am not powerful enough in the weaving of water to contend with the power that resides on those islands, replied Valinar cryptically. Oh, so you just expect this power, whatever it might be, to be kind enough to let us through simply because you are on board? Even though there is no way you could ever have met this, whatever it is, said Myra sarcastically. Yes, that is exactly what I expect, because while I have never met this entity before, you may rest assured that I am expected, was Valinar's reply, and he would say no more on the subject. Realizing this, Myra turned her back on the creatures swimming around the prow of the ship and watched their carefree swimming for a few moments before her reverie was broken by a quiet observation for the elves. Your bruises seem to be healing quite effectively. Myra instinctively touched the yellowed and almost completely faded bruise on her right cheek before responding. Yes, the healers did their job well. I was most fortunate that I did not receive more than a few cuts and bruises. I would say it was skill more than fortune. You are certainly a very gifted warrior to stand up so well against so many, Valinar said kindly. Blushing, Myra responded, I thank you for such a high compliment, but you are certainly a greater warrior than I am. You are not touched at all, although perhaps the greater power you possess may well be more the reason for your coming through that unscathed. It does not take any great skill with weaving spells or great power in area to enact that defense, confided the elf. However, it does take effort to create the barrier and maintain it, greatly limiting the amount of time even a great weaver of spells can maintain such a defense. And if one only puts it up when expecting to be imminently struck a great blow, there is always the chance that one will not be able to do so in time. I got lucky. At this revelation, Myra was curious. Just how powerful are you? Did you even need your sword at all to carry that battle? If I was not concerned with causing damage to your city and its inhabitants, and if I did not mind making my presence instantly known to Ushara, and if I had been seen the soldiers approaching before they were already upon us, yes, I could have dispatched many of them without unsheathing my sword. Why did it matter that they were already almost upon us when you became aware of it? You should know that, admonished Valinar. Weaving spells takes effort and concentration. I may have greater power than you, but it would still have taken a moment or two for me to weave a strong enough spell. So with them so close at hand, the time it would have taken me would have been more than long enough for them to strike first. And if such a spell had failed to kill or wound some of the soldiers, I might not have gotten a second try. But could you not have cast some far simpler spell and simply put more power behind it? Posited Myra. That is true, of course, but would you really have wished me to do so inside your city? Inquired the elf rhetorically. I certainly could have caused upheavals in the earth, a giant fireball, a mighty blast of wind, or some other such simple spell, and put sufficient power behind it to kill or at least disrupt our attackers. But in doing so, I would have caused great damage, and in all likelihood would have killed a large number of Romaldans as well. Myra absorbed this information for a few moments before coming back to another point her companion had made. You said that if you were to cast some great spell, that Ushara would be able to know where you are instantly, and therefore be able to track you down. How would she be able to do that? And wouldn't the fact that we let the Union soldiers, and especially their commander, live, alert her to the fact that are abroad in the world? I confess that I do not know exactly how she would be able to work such a feat, but I was warned thus from a source that I certainly believe. Regardless of how she is able to do so, however, it would still make things very dangerous for me. As it stands, she is likely still receiving reports on my movements, but they are several weeks old. This would make it very difficult for her to effectively send assassins after me. On the other hand, if she were to instantly discern my exact location, it would make it far easier to do just that. I suppose your reasoning for not destroying the Union soldiers is sound, mused Myra, taking on a judicial air, which made Valinar smile. And in either case, I was not interested in killing all the Union soldiers, most of whom are, in all likelihood, merely following orders, and as such they deserve mercy, added Valinar sadly. I just hope you are right that allowing the soldiers who survived our battles to go free is a wise choice, sighed Myra. It is. Much of my plan hinges on the Union not moving too quickly into Romalda. Once they get news that your people have left the Union and have declared war upon them, they will pause to consider before committing so much of their army to their objectives in Romalda. Although it is my estimation that they will still do exactly that in time, they would act more quickly if their men had been slain. Yeah, I suppose even if they decided to devote their main army to the conquest of Romalda, they would pay dearly for the crossing into our lands. There is a formidable string of fortifications which are built during our wars with the cities that eventually formed the Union some centuries ago. Even leaving them undermanned as we are doing by following your plan, it will take time for the Union to seize them. And if they attempt to go around them, they would suffer a great many casualties. Are you not in favor of my plan, then? Inquired the elf. It is certainly interesting, responded Myra, not unkindly. It relies heavily on what you expect the Union to do, and I suppose that it makes sense to make such strategic uses of our navy, especially since we can no more quickly take or circumvent their fortifications than they could ours. Therefore, your may makes at least some sense. I am forced to agree with my uncle, though, that you are either a genius or a complete idiot. For all our sake, I hope you are the former, despite your lack of experience. As this conversation had proceeded, the ship began entering the mists, or at least that is how it seemed to those on board at first. After a few moments sailing, it was realized that by those on board that while the mist seemed to close up again behind them, they could see with perfect clarity for several dozen feet on either side. The island was also coming into clear view before them. The mist had indeed parted. The island was quite small, and it consisted mainly of a single great mound of gray rock jutting out from the ocean. There was a natural harbor, however, with a thin strip of sandy beach. Once the ship had got into the alcove, those on board began to notice what looked like a simple mass of gray rocks from a distance was actually covered with various doors and windows, as if the elves had built their homes directly into the island. On the far side of the island was what looked like a giant spiraled seashell, which was set on which was set a large blue crystal which pulsated with energy. The only discernible path on the island, a crumbling stair, led from the beach directly toward the seashell tower. Several members of the crew cried out in surprise as the sea around the boat was now full of Maer-men, and even more were beginning to slither from the various holes in the rocks. Once they reached the beaches, they reared up as snakes do when they are prepared to strike, although they merely stared intently at the ship. Wait for me here, said Valinar loudly before leaping over the bow of the ship. The shore was still somewhat distant, but the elf landed lightly on the sand, his feet barely seeming to leave an imprint. The sea elves regarded him with interest, but neither approached nor made any action to halt or delay his progress toward the crumbling stair. It took barely any time for Valinar's long, sure-footed strides to carry him over the low ridge on the island and bring him to the towering seashell. Once he crested the ridge, he saw that the seashell tower was the centerpiece of what looked like a large house, partially carved from the island. The rest was made up of large seashells artfully constructed together. All around the structure were perfectly clear pools of water of varying depths and shades of blue, with walkways stretching between them. Almost instinctively, Valinar made his way to a spherical pool of water at the base of the giant seashell. It seemed to be the deepest of the pools and was the darkest blue Valinar had ever seen. As he approached, the water seemed to froth at the center of the pond, and after a moment a figure emerged. While the figure rippled and changed constantly, it was quite clearly the figure of a woman, with hair almost down to her feet and wearing simple robes. The only thing on the figure that did not change was the eyes. They were two glowing points of light in the figure's face, and although they were perfectly round and lidless, Valinar nevertheless could not tell but feel that they expressed great sadness. The figure approached him slowly, not so much walking as flowing over the surface of the pool. When it had reached the edge, a mouth formed and began speaking in a voice that sounded like the rushing of the sea on a stormy day. So, the time has come at last. The last of the Sarah Elfen is out of our long despair. It ends at last. Valinar seemed confused by this. Long despair, he inquired. Yes, the despair that holds us trapped and powerless to act. Valinar looked the figure up and down in confusion before asking, Has Kiral really been sapping your powers for so long? Kiral? The figure muttered, as if trying to remember something before addressing Valinar directly. Yes, it is a slow process. And as such, you will not be able to do anything against Kiral when Ushara finally succeeds in helping him break from his prison, he prompted Valinar. Laera nodded slowly. Yes, as we are now, we will be able to do nothing against him, although in the old days he was still the greatest of us. Then we must stop Ushara, insisted Valinar. Laera seemed to become still grimmer at this proclamation. I hope I am wrong, but I am not sure you will be able to. Ushara has been planning this deed for decades, and her plans are nearing fruition. You are certainly forcing her hand, but it may ultimately be too late, especially since you cannot confront her directly. At this, Valinar bristled with anger. Everyone keeps telling me that, but no one will tell me why. I am told merely that she is more powerful than me. How? How did she even find out about Kiral and his imprisonment? And what is she? While she looks human on the surface, there is something about her that makes me think that she is not a member of any race that I am aware of existing on this Terra. The figure was silent for a moment before, but seeing the determination in the elf's eyes, she began to speak. I suppose that it is not fair to keep you in the dark. Ushara is not from this Terra, although where she hails from I do not know, nor am I familiar with the race. Although her nearly human appearance would indicate that her people were once humans that were changed through the use of magic. Or perhaps her appearance is merely an illusion to put people on their ease. She's from another Terra, reiterated Valinar in shock. I have heard of other Terra, and the ancient legends of my people say that it was possible to travel between them, but it is something that I have not heard of happening since the ancient times. This Terra is isolated, came the reply, and as such it is traveled to very rarely. That she is from another Terra would explain much of why we warn you that she is so powerful. While the spell to create a portal through the swirling chaos of area that exists between terrors simply it takes an extraordinary amount of power to enact. If Ushara is so powerful and she knows me to be dangerous to her plans, why did she not simply destroy me when we met, or seek me out herself rather than send others to do the work for them? That is rather hard to explain, mused Lyra. But to put it simply, there is a set of rules that governs what mages such as her can and cannot do when they travel to other Terra. Mages capable of doing this are often called Terra Magi for the great power they wield. She is allowed to advise, to guide, but is forbidden for any outsider to act directly or to kill, except in defense. This is why Ushara has been had to enact such an elaborate scheme to free Kiral from his prison, rather than simply freeing him herself. So there are powers that are beyond these Terra Magi, asked Valinar indignantly. If there are, why do they let her do what she is doing? Why don't they stop her? There are powers far, far beyond that of Ushara, but for the great power they possess, they are not omniscient. There are many crimes like this or worse that are perpetrated all the time. However, those that could stop her are bound by the same rules that she is. As long as she does not openly violate the ancient laws that have been set down, they can only act against her in the same way that she is now acting. But the mere possibility that some of them might be watching is what continues to prevent Ushara from taking any direct action against you. For to do so would mean her own destruction if she were caught. Why can't I go after her then? If she isn't allowed to kill me, why can't I drive her away? Did you not hear what I said a moment ago? Admonished Lyra. She can destroy you if she is acting in self-defense. And unfortunately, your innate power and the power that you have been granted means that she does not defend herself against you. You do have the capability to kill her. Well, of course, there are plenty of ways of defending oneself that are not lethal to the attacker. Ushara would simply use it as an excuse to kill you and claim to self-defense in doing so. That is unfortunate, grumbled Val'inar. Perhaps, admitted Lyra sadly, but not all Terra Magi are such vile creatures as Ushara. There are many that travel the Terra in order to help those in trouble and make those Terra a better place. Those laws were set down to allow them to continue to do what they do, as much as they are to punish those who transgress it. You have yet to answer my other question, prompted Valinar. What possible interest could Ushara have with this Terra and with aiding Kiral? I confess that I do not know for sure, admitted Lyra, but I can guess. I have heard of forces in the verse that seek to gain control of Terra by placing a puppet in control, although for what purpose they do so I cannot say. However, I think it likely that she found common cause with Kiral and is hoping to turn him into such a puppet, although I am not sure that it will work out for her in the end. And where exactly the Union fits in with this scheme is also beyond me, although I recognize that it is certainly important that she be stopped. I shall heed your words as I continue my travels, but I fear that my companions may soon become concerned about me and might well risk a landing on the island, which I fear would be disastrous for them. You are indeed correct. The fated elves who populate these waters would certainly not take well to that. I wish that you did not have to go. It has been such a long time since I have spoken with any that still possess control over their minds. But I suppose that we all have our burdens to bear. And I, for my part, crave to know more of the past and how these events have come to pass, but much of the plan that I have drawn up hinges on speed. As with the others of my kind you have met, I shall increase your connection you feel with the area of water. As she said this, Lyra raised her right arm and held it level with the elf's head. The arm suddenly extended straight into his head. Instead of pain, Valinar felt an energizing rush in his head that spread like a river down his whole body and was gone as soon as it had come. Valinar kept his eyes closed for a few moments as he felt, as if for the first time, the great power of the ocean around him. I shall also give you this gift, said Lyra, as the water behind her once more began to churn, and from its azure depths rose a helm colored the same dark blue as the water. It was shaped in the likeness of a great sea serpent with two sapphires glowing faintly, serving as the eyes of the monster. This helm was created long ago for the lord of the elves that lived in this island. Along with being well nigh impervious to attack, it grants the wearer clear sight and hearing, regardless of where they should find themselves. I thank you for your mighty gifts, said Valinar, bowing deeply. I will not forget what you have told me, and I hope that I can soon end your suffering. As the figure began to dissolve back into the pool of water, Valinar heard Lyra say, almost in a whisper, I do hope that you can. With that, Valinar walked slowly back along the pathways up the crumbling stairs, back toward the ship carrying the helm at his side. The ship had been gently run aground on the beach, and most of the sailors were still staring at the sea elves in both disbelief and apprehension. Although Myra was looking anxiously at the crest of the ridge, he had disappeared over, and Urgar, for his part, looked glad that the motion of the ship had stopped for at least a moment. Valinar was hailed by several sailors with an obvious note of relief in their voices as he approached the ship. This was especially true since once he was back in the sight, the fated elves on the beach began to slither away, either into the caves or back into the sea. They made to toss Val'inar a rope, but with a jump he grabbed onto the railing of the ship and swung himself aboard. My task here is done. The men of the water will push the ship off the beach and guide us into the open water again, after which I request that we continue on to our destination. This elicited cheers from the crew as Myra started barking orders to make the ship ready to sail, and a groan from Urgar, who had hoped for a little longer to recover from his seasickness. It took little less than half an hour for the Maer-men to guide the ship out into the ocean. Just as when they were coming in, the mists parted for them only to close a short distance behind. The island had been hidden from view almost as soon as they had left the cove. All but Urgar were happy when they were out of the mists entirely and sailing free. Valinar could tell that the crew was going to enjoy sharing this story when they finally got back to port, despite how worried they initially were. They had made it to the Isle of Mist and lived to tell the tale. He wondered if any of them would actually be believed. He also could not help but wonder how long it would be before any of those sailors did return home. After all, they had quite a ways to travel before their voyage was done, and so much to do when they arrived. But if such concerns plagued the crew or his companions, they did not show it, because at the moment there was just the thrill of having been somewhere wondrous and of sailing the sea. All right, that is chapter 12. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments below. What you liked, what you didn't like on the reading, the story, the chapter, anything like that. Also, it'd be fantastic if you like, share, subscribe down below. And checked out my socials, followed me on there, and check out my books. In the meantime, though, again, my name is John. I hope you all have a wonderful day and that you have a chance to do or experience something creative, and I will catch you on the next one.